Another very special show this week. Brad Powers is going to join us, and we're going to talk NCAA, but we're not. We're going to be talking process. We're going to talk about how we go about doing our business. Another video that's going to be informative from a different viewpoint because the picks are easy to find, but how you get to the picks is a different program. So, Brad, you and I have known each other a long time, and we communicate via the word quite often, but we don't actually talk in person or at all. So it's a pleasure to have you on. And I guess I didn't even think about a first question for you. The easiest way to start is I think everybody knows you, that you are out there all over the place and you have all these futures in place. And I want to know how you start up. When are you starting up? What's your process in starting up? What are the rituals that you're going through to get to the point where you're prepared for these lines to come out?
So first off, thanks for having me, Chris and Ron. It's a pleasure to talk to you guys. Obviously it starts early in the process, and it pretty much starts right after the final game is done, the national championship game. I start, my prep for the upcoming season. I even bet futures plays right, when they post those first the futures as far as national title for the upcoming season, right after the game's over with. And sometimes I'm even involved that early in the process. So, it starts with, returning experience for me, and where does that start? I mean, within a week of the national title game, you'll get early entries to the NFL draft. So obviously those are the most talented players in the country. So if you get a lot of, teams that had some unexpected losses, guys that you expected to come back for their senior seasons and don't, I mean, that's kind of something that a starting off point. Transfer portal creates a lot of uncertainty and creates a lot of more work than what was 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. And thought process in that is I got to keep up with it daily, even though I'm betting college basketball and whatnot. I still at least probably work an hour a day, even during the months of January, February, and March on college football. Just whether it's transfer portal or anything new, late breaking news, coaching staff additions. So that's kind of the process there. And then, believe it or not, April, I go full time college football prep. And it kind of starts with spring games. 50, 60 of them are televised now. And I'll spend the 2 hours and watch that game. Now, is it an end all to be all? No. But I can learn a heck of a lot about that team in a 2 hour window, actually, with my own eyes, watching, who's going to, especially if it's, quarterbacks that are relatively new to the team, who can throw the football, who can throw an out pattern, across the field and whatnot. So I start there, and then we start reading the magazines. Then I do my own legwork as far as returning starters. And then it all goes into a process of creating a power rating.
Okay. That's kind of similar, but not on the same timetable as to how you do it. I'm so involved in the NFL. And now we're at a lull period in the NFL where not much is going to happen. I know something happened 24 hours ago with Baker Mayfield, but in general, you can digest the news now, the NFL, the draft, the schedule is out, and so on. So in college, college is a business now. We know that. There's 27 or 29 new coaches. How do you approach the fact that not only new coaches, but new coordinators, more than half the teams are changing at the most important places for 18, 19, 20-year-olds?
So great question. Obviously, as much instability as there is as far as players go in the transfer portal and leaving early, a lot of instability on the coaching ranks as well. So, I have my ideas on who's good and who isn't as far as coaching staffs. And we've seen coaches, it used to be 20, 30 years ago. I mean, it was like year 3 is when coaches would make their big move. Yeah. That process has been accelerated where, I mean, if you're not showing something by year 2, you might be in trouble. So what am I looking for? Obviously everyone knows like the big names, like your Lincoln Riley's, the USC's, your Brian Kelly's, LSU. Where I'm looking for value is guys that, underrated coaches that have really filled out their staff with guys that I respect, know, and trust. So I'll give you an example. 2 of them this year that don't have a lot of fanfare, but I'm really high. Not necessarily for this season, but for the future of the program. Texas Tech, hired a guy by the name of Joey McGuire. I love how he filled out his staff. Tim DeRuyter is a good defensive coordinator, and he took the Western Kentucky offensive coordinator. And Western Kentucky was a team that made a lot of waves last year with arguably the best offense in the country. So that's a really good staff that nationally no one's getting any, publicity or whatnot. And I like it. The other one would be Washington, Kalen DeBoer. I think the analytics markets, the guys that really bet the sport in and out, have liked him since his days at Fresno State. In fact, going back to his days as an Indiana offensive coordinator, that's one that's probably an underrated hire. So that's what I'm looking for. You mentioned like stability. I'll give you another stat. It's really simple that I look for as far as teams that are possibly bet on early in the process. I just look at this. Do you return your head coach? Do you return your quarterback? You return your offense and defensive coordinators? Only 12 out of 65 Power 5 teams and only 30 out of 131 teams just answer yes to those four simple questions.
Thanks for having that at your fingertips. It just shows, how you got to keep up and how you got to analyze all these changes. Kind of a follow-up to that would be anticipation, teams that haven't been there before. We talked about this, Chris and I, on our last show, but it's something important to me. You had the Indianas, the Tennessees, the Iowa States that were now rated last year in the top 10, and they didn't get the job done. The expectations were much higher. Is that something you look at in terms of under the radar or over the radar?
Yeah, it is. It kind of goes to, I think Allen Boston, going way back, had levels as a program. I believe in that. I'm a firm believer in that. And, Iowa State at their highest isn't going to be Ohio State, in my opinion. And I follow recruiting, and you can surprise one year. But as far as, taking those extra couple steps, it's usually a couple year process. It just does not happen overnight in college football. Very rarely. And you, specific to your question, yeah, I find it year after year, teams that have high expectations, that have exceeded expectations previous seasons, when they turn in from the hunter to the hunted. It's not usually teams. I'm not saying I'm selling them, but I'm kind of cautious as far as buying stock in them. Iowa State was a great example last year. Was a team that, won the Fiesta Bowl, first time ever they won a major bowl in school history the previous year. They returned like 20 starters a year ago. Everybody's building up as a national title contender. And we saw, even with all that returning experience, there was a ceiling with that talent. That talent had already reached their capabilities, and there just wasn't an extra gear that team had. So it kind of goes back to Allen Boston's levels as a program. Again, I'm a firm believer in it.
Now, you're known to have just an asinine amount of futures already in play. And I found that, like college football's kind of gotten away from me a little bit. I've had to make a lot of changes over recent years. I used to be there at the opening and betting, the openers. And I would find I'd be in a position where I'd have, great line value, but I was hitting 50-50 on this stuff. I seem to kind of remember, refresh my memory, that you had a monster CLV year last year, but had some difficulties with the win-loss, similarly to the way I found it to be. Is that in fact true? And how do you think you're set up this year?
Great question. Yeah, so I had some really good CLV. I'm talking game of the year, season win totals, and all that whatnot last year. And you're right, it was about break even. I think it was like 50, basically 52, 53%. Didn't make that much. Wasn't worth, obviously, my money being tied up for that long. Has that always been the case? No. I've disappointing seasons for me, I tend to think are 55%. Otherwise, why are you making those bets? Why are you tying up your money? So, the fact that it was break even was very disappointing. Do I expect that this year? Obviously not. And there's probably a couple different things this year that make me more optimistic. Number one, there's more. Like last year was a year where you had historically experienced teams. So everybody got that extra year from COVID. And I think there was more known commodities, even guys that don't follow the sportsbook operators and whatnot, that don't follow college football year round like I do. There was so much experience coming back that they hung better numbers. Let's put it that way. This year, teams are historically inexperienced. And the transfer portal, it has happened. There's more key players in the transfer portal than ever before. So I actually think this year there's more uncertainty in the market than ever before. I feel I can price that better than the sports books. And just to prove that I think there's more uncertainty, the books have shown it. I mean, you don't have to be Elon Musk to figure some of these futures markets and season win totals out. And just shop. I mean, and I'm not talking you got to shop at 20 different books. Just to look at 3-4 different books, you'll be able to find a half win difference on a season win total, if not a game difference if you're betting early in the process. Heck, I even found teams with 2 games difference as far as a season win total. Wow. And obviously, I'm not too involved on futures, but there's so many instances where a team, 40-1 to win the conference, go to the other book, it's 80-1. So, there's a big that's the big reason why I have 240 bets already. I didn't anticipate having it, but I just think the books right now are having so much uncertainty pricing college football.
How many have gone against you so far?
Out of that 240, less than 10, I think. I made 62 week 0, week 1 bets. I think only 3 have went against me out of those 62.
Yeah, the shopping is just such a crucial point, because for me, part of the process isn't always, I have to bet this team. It's that there's an outlier in there. There's 8 books on one and there's 1 or 2. Yep. I have a lean that way. I'm going to take a position knowing that once I get into further study, or if something happens in August, I can get off that position.
Yep.
So how many of those, if you had to put a percentage, for me, it's probably like 75-25 or 70-30. 30% of the plays I make are really speculation plays at this time of year. What about you?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I would say probably half of my plays are just purely, I'm just picking off bad numbers, at least.
Okay.
Now that I think about it, it's greater than 50%. Just purely me. Look, I'll give you some examples. I'm pretty negative and pessimistic about USC this year. Bet under their season win total under 9.5. I just think there's way too hype for a team that has some depth issues. I think if they have any injuries at certain positions, they're in trouble.
Yeah.
But with that being said, I was in line betting games of the year at South Point with Chris Andrews, and I found myself betting on USC in every one of their games that were posted, like 5 different tickets on USC. Games that I thought I was going to be against USC. Well, Chris was 10 points different than my power ratings on that particular team. So the more I think about it, it's probably more than 50%. I'm just picking off outlier numbers. It wasn't me heading into a certain team expecting a position.
So you're kind of playing off saying that, wow, they intentionally have it lower than anticipated, or they want to take some USC money, or they just hung a bad number, and you're just going to take advantage of that.
Absolutely. And look, I'll figure, like you mentioned earlier, look, if I'll figure it out later in the process. If it's game week or it's the end of summer and something happens, I can always get off of it. But when I'm making bets, look, I'm not looking for half-point edges this time of year. Obviously, a point edge. If I'm making a bet, I'm thinking it's 3+ points off, if not more.
Yeah, excellent point.
I seem to recall I heard an interview with I think Mitch and Paulie in the morning, and you were talking about how you'd snag some monster numbers, and I thought it was kind of odd that you were so open about that, because as far as preserving accounts, how do you monitor your relationships with the various books, and how much focus are you trying to have in keeping books? Are you having a problem, maintaining accounts, or that's not a concern for you?
Well, that's a great question. I tend to bet at books that don't limit players. This is one of them, circa. So a lot of times I have monster numbers there. A lot of times those numbers I have bet through other people. So I can say whatever they want. They can't necessarily pinpoint me because I wasn't the one that actually made it. So I kind of hide it in that regard. It's been an issue for some of the guys that have been running for me, obviously, and we just deal with it at that basis. But I just look, if you ask me a question, this is just a life philosophy for me. You ask the right question, I'll give you the right answer. I'm not going to, keep it to myself. There might be a time where I walk away from the media and stuff, where I don't need, any of this, and I just feel comfortable making my money as it is. But I've always just had a philosophy. If you ask me, what's the biggest position you got, or what's the biggest line mover you're ahead of? I'm just going to answer honestly to that question.
There was a scroll that went down about making your bets early in Arizona and so on. I presume that because you're so close to Arizona that you crossed the border and you went over and you made some bets in Arizona. They have a wonderful number of books there. How did that go in terms of finding value? And do you think that's kind of the future, is that you have to leave Las Vegas to get some of the game day lines on a week-to-week basis?
Yeah, that probably is the future. Now look, and probably what helps me in not getting limited is I'm not looking to really crush the books. I'm single. I don't have to feed the kids or keep the wife happy with jewelry. I'm not looking for generational wealth. I'm just looking to eat. Obviously, you not worry about the rent money or whatever. I got a brand new vehicle and stuff like that. As long as I got all that stuff, I'm happy. So I'm not talking about trying to get down 5 dimes and stuff, 10 dimes per bet. I'm fine, keeping a little bit flying under the radar with regards to Arizona. Even though I'm a high volume type better, and I was trying to bet some certain limits. I was struggling. Now there's a lot of other, you mentioned sports books there that aren't available in Nevada. Your Barstools, your Fox Bets, your DraftKings, your FanDuels of the world. I was struggling getting even a nickel, $500 down on some of these season win totals. What I found was just come in under 500, 475. You don't get that, the winning spiel of death on your thing. It just goes right through. So you got to maneuver some things. And you're right. I mean, first time this off season, I made a half dozen trips across the Hoover Dam to bet. That has never been the case before. And some of it is, I love their offerings in other books. And some of it it's gosh darn it. Nevada doesn't have very many offerings. There's books in the past that have had season win totals up by now, and they're not up yet. So, I got to go where the bets are.
It's actually, it's nearly criminal how little offerings we have here in Nevada. It really, and it makes no sense, because you have a FanDuel operating here in Nevada, but they don't, and they'll offer 1,000 things that they don't offer us here in Nevada. So that's what doesn't make sense. I know the Westgates and some of these other companies claim that it's due to the apps that they have contracts with. So hopefully we see a change at some point, but it doesn't seem like they're that interested in preserving, being the king of where to bet sports.
But come to California and, you have numerous options.
Yeah, zero. Brad, most common question we get, or I get in DMs also, is what advice do you have to offer people trying to create their own power numbers? Do you manually change them, or have a spreadsheet process that indicates how you should change them? What is your overall methodology to keep track of all these teams accurately?
Yeah, so I got a pretty complex. it's Excel, but it's pretty complex. I could have it in my background, but it'd probably be too distracting. I have multiple worksheets, so many formulas. I got it down pat that I've been doing it so long, and that the start where I got some of the start was obviously my days working at Phil Steele on at least on the starting point on how to create a power rating. There's all different ways that you go about it. If you're brand new, what I'll tell people, there's a lot of free public power ratings that are out there. I'm not saying that they're the end all to be all. I'm not saying blindly bet them, but use them. When I was starting off a decade ago, maybe use a combination. Go to your Jeff Sagerins, your Bill Connolly's of the world. Phil Steele still posts that he's got power ratings in his magazine each year. If you want to start it off, maybe take an average of those, weigh them maybe differently, ones that you trust a little bit more. And you at least got a starting off point at that point, as far as a power rating, until you learn your own process and doing your own work. I think that's a good.
What is that starting point, though? That's what they all ask, is what is that starting point?
You have to back test it. You have to go back.
Yeah.
Before I started my power ratings in the late 70s, I took 3 years of data and I practiced and I worked on how to start a power rating. Where does it end? And what are the returning starters? And what's the stability at quarterback, at coach? Back then, especially, line of scrimmage meant everything. Could you run the ball? Could you stop the run? Until the game changed to more of a pro-ready format. There's no magic formula that way. It's just I encourage back testing before you actually even start at a power rating. Look at, I have Wyoming, for example. They've pretty much been in the same range for 10 years, give or take a point or two. So you're not going to start them 5 points lower or 5 points higher in the next year. I think it just comes with experience, but you could add to that.
Well, very well said. First off, yeah, you do. If you're really gonna jump in and bet purely off the power ratings, then you have to back test it first, because you don't want to jump into something that you don't even know if it works or not. I'll also say this, and about a month ago, I got on a public figure as far as his power ratings. It's okay to be off market. Otherwise, how do you bet? But you can't be off. You got to respect the market. If it's opening numbers, then obviously a guy like myself, I don't respect an opening number. I feel I can make the number better than the book. Otherwise, why would I bet so many? But if it's a more liquid market, numbers have been out there for a while. Guys like myself have bet into it, and you're still 14, 17, whatever system model, whatever you're using. If you're still 10 plus points off market, you got a problem with your model, because the market isn't off that much. Because if it was, I'd be betting it. Chris would be betting it. Ron would be going in there and betting stuff like that. So that would be a big caveat when you're trying to play around with that stuff.
And I want to piggyback on that too, because it's once you arrive at a starting place, how do you adjust your power ratings? My advice would be, take somebody like a Jeff Sagarin or one of those and so on. You've seen a game played, then you adjust power ratings, then go back to what he adjusted the power ratings and see if you're still in alignment. And it's okay, like you said, you don't have to be in alignment once you get the process down because you have an opinion or you trust your own process. But if you're consistently out of alignment and you're not getting closing market value, or you're not winning your plays, or your power ratings seem off 6 weeks down the road every single week, then you need to find a different way of adjusting. Why are they adjusting a certain way, and why are you adjusting? Go back each week, not just set them, but see how they've adjusted compared to how you've adjusted week 2, week 3, week 4.
Certainly. And yeah, I couldn't have said that better myself. And I'll also say this, when you're adjusting them on a week-to-week basis, at the end of the year, and I think you should know this, you shouldn't be adjusting too much once you get that sample size, 8, 9, 10 games in. You get a little less, you get a little bit more conservative, I should say, as far as upgrading, downgrading a team. You're not as aggressive in making those changes as you were in weeks 1, 2, and 3. So also keep that in mind if you're doing power ratings.
Absolutely.
Are you creating your own strength of schedule that you rely on of teams played, or are there other people that create that you trust their strength of schedule numbers as a reference also, or do you use a combination of it in comparison?
Yeah, so I mean, I always have my own numbers, but I'm always, even to this day, I'll check to make sure I'm not too far off. Whether it's Bill Connolly or a Phil Steele with this strength of schedule. Basically, I'm creating my own because it's my power ratings. In a spreadsheet, I'm factoring home and away. Obviously, home field advantage is worth a hell of a lot less than what it was 20 years ago, but still, couple points in a game. So I factor that in, average it all out, and boom, bang, I got my strength of schedule.
How do you go through September, where if you look at UCLA's schedule, they play, I don't know, Alabama A&M, Bowling Green, and some high school down the road for their first 3 games, and another school is playing Power 5 teams. Now, this is unusual for UCLA. I don't want to pick on them, but you're dealing with apples and oranges at the beginning of the year. Are you setting expectations for these teams that are a little different? Or do you go team by team and set their expectations so you're not surprised when they're winning 50-10 or something like that? How do you go about comparing apples and oranges?
Really good question. I'll attack this a couple different ways. Yeah, I mean, obviously those teams, I'm treating those teams different that are 3, 4, 5 touchdown favorite. If they end up winning, falling short of expectations by 7 points or overachieving by 7 points, obviously that's different than a team that, is a 10-point underdog and lost the game by 3 on a final play. So it's always going to be a team by team specific. Here's where there is value. I like those teams like UCLA because they'll usually get overvalued. They win 3 straight games, 42-14. I'm looking to play against teams that really play a weak strength of schedule early on the process, play against those teams once they hit conference play. Similarly, on the flip side of the coin, I also like playing on teams that play, really good strength of schedules, obviously in the non-conference play. Maybe they're sitting at 1-3 playing, just playing. They had to punch above their weight in most of those games. When they get the conference play, I'm looking to play on those teams. So that's usually how I handle those teams. I find value once October comes around.
Yeah, it's an unbelievable way of dealing with it, especially when the line of scrimmage meant even more. If you had a team that played a soft schedule and they aren't going to control the line of scrimmage once they play in conference schedule, yet they're favored, that's a wonderful situation for handicappers.
Are you creating your own totals? Are you heavily into the totals? And if so, it's a very common question I get asked is, what are the important parts that are factoring into you creating your totals numbers?
So obviously teams that have a little bit more stability are easier to do with totals when you have the same, head coach, offensive coordinator and whatnot, and you got the quarterback back. Those teams are much more reliable. So I trust those totals numbers better. So if I find something that's off market, fire away. Where I find a lot of value, especially in today's day and age, is if I know for certain a team's going up tempo, average, 65, 70 plays per game a year ago, and I know for a fact that they're going to run 10, 15, 20 more plays per game this season. Obviously, early in the process, I don't think the odds makers, the opening numbers don't grasp it. They get corrected pretty quickly in today's day and age, but
Right.
I'm firing overs. I will say this with regards to week 1, and I bet a ton of totals at Circa. When they open it up, I found myself betting a ton of unders. I thought they overpriced a ton of games. I feel teams are going to be more conservative out of the gate. There's a lot of conference matchups this year in week 1. I almost blindly bet, and that never, not a great ideal situation, but I mean, almost every conference game that they posted, I end up betting under. I mean, I find myself a lot of times when October rolls around, I'm betting that first or second conference game under. You get more competitive teams. There's more familiarity and whatnot. The game has more meaning in a lot of instances. So that's some of the philosophies that I put into it. Plays per game and tempo is everything in today's day and age because there's such disparity.
What about injuries? There's so many factors on that. For me, they tend to be overblown in the point spread unless they're cluster injuries. 3 offensive linemen, 2 defensive backs. Obviously, quarterback's a different story these days. But how do you factor in injuries? How do you keep abreast of injuries? What's your methodology in terms of handicapping that?
So I don't per se have, 3,000 players in a, in a spreadsheet. And I got, this guy's worth a quarter of a point, half point.
Right.
Whatnot. I do the quarterbacks and I do it in the preseason. I get if this quarterback goes out, I think he's worth 3 points if he gets hurt. So I do that beforehand.
Okay.
It's also probably the main reason why I watch spring games. I want to get to know the players. There's so much, sometimes uncertainty because players are new. You get and also another thing that's new compared to 20, 30 years ago, freshmen come in and can play. If they get all that spring practice and that freshman, I think the market sometimes downgrades, like you said, they factor it in too much. And if I think the guy can play, then, and I've seen it with my own eyes and the market hasn't because they're not watching the spring game, then I find value in that. But I think outside of quarterback, you're right. Unless you're a first team All-American and you don't have much talent surrounding you, you just don't mean that much to the point spread, even in college.
Yeah. I have an example is in Minnesota.
That's what I'm looking for. So one thing that I do with is I have depth charts, every week. And I'll circle guys that are out for the year. And if I start, getting multiple circles at a certain position group, that's something that triggers something for me to make some bets.
The Gophers were an interesting story. They return like a 1,200-yard rusher or whatever. He rushes for something like 200 yards right away. Then he's hurt. And they say, oh, no, their season's going to go. Then the next guy comes in and he looks like a gangbuster. And you're saying, okay, we're okay. Then he gets hurt. And then a freshman comes in and they still win 9 games because their system worked. So there's a lot of give and take in terms of injuries at certain positions. And maybe we should value the line more than the running back.
Absolutely. And that was the case specific to Minnesota. They had one of the top offensive lines in the country. So it didn't matter who. I mean, Chris could be back there, take a couple carries. So,
I'm not running behind Chris.
I was pretty speedy back in my day. Brad, do you feel that the consolidation of conferences is going to help or hurt your edge with NCAA betting?
I'm not afraid to say I don't know at this point. There's uncertainty. I'm not sure. I have my own theories. I look from a money aspect. USC and UCLA are going to be better off. But I'll tell you, playing Iowa and Minnesota and Wisconsin, very physical teams in late October and November, a little different than playing Washington State or Arizona State. So my thought process, at least specific to that move, I think they're going to be hurt at least early on. They're going to have to change some of their recruiting profiles on players. With there being uncertainty, I'll say this: I am comfortable enough, and I'm not a high ego guy, but I'm comfortable enough to think that I'll be able to figure it out before the sports book. So put it that way.
Yeah, for me, I kind of look forward to it. But we had Paul on last week, and he feels like it takes away his small conference edge, that he's doing all his hard work on these smaller conferences, and that's going to dissipate over time. But for somebody like me, I kind of like the consolidation.
Yeah, certainly. Look, you can still bet. I bet FCS. So, as long as that's still available, so as long as the MAC's not going away, the Sun Belt's not going away, I'm okay. I don't care what they do at the top. The market, everybody seems to focus on the top, and deservedly so. If you're a guy that likes to get a hell of a lot down, then I can understand some concerns. But I'm totally fine laying in the weeds, betting still group of fives and whatnot. I think there'll always be value more on those smaller teams than the bigger ones.
Chris knows this, a pet peeve of mine, and we talked to Paul about this a little bit, but I still think special teams evaluation, while hard to quantify, is undervalued in terms of its importance, especially to the season win market, but also to short-priced underdogs, favorites that are over 7 if they don't have the special teams. Do you do anything in the preseason or adjustments during the season to account for special teams? How much do you value college special team play?
Another really good question. I do. So one of my lengthy processes, and I got 2 teams left out of 131. I go through every position on every single team. I basically do what I call an up down. I learned this process at working at Phil Steele. So, I look at what was the expectation of that position heading into last year, what happened, and what's going on this year. How many guys were lost, how many guys are back and whatnot. And I'm pretty much, for most teams, +3 is really, really good for that position. -3 obviously is really bad. You go from 5 returning offensive line starters, now you don't return any type of thing. I think that's worth 3 or 4 points to the team, something like that. Yeah. And again, case by case basis. And I go through 10 different positions. So I go quarterback, running back, and whatnot. What I'm getting at is special teams a part of that. So I'll treat the special teams just like I would an offensive line group or whatnot. So I do think it's important. You're exactly right. The market just never grasps how important center, long snapper, that whole process there just is never going to really get, in my opinion, unless AI really gets a part of it, is never going to be, I think, priced accordingly. They're never going to adjust a team enough for a backup center for Louisiana Lafayette. They're just So, and I can specifically remember a game from a couple of years ago where Louisiana basically having a bad snapper cost them in a certain game. They just couldn't snap the football accordingly.
I think there were 3 snaps over the quarterback's head. Yep. They just gave up on it eventually, and they went for it on 4th down at the end of the game.
What are you doing differently over the last couple of years? Because I know I'm doing a lot differently with NCAA handicapping because I was heavily run focused, and as the scoring elevated, it really changed my handicap, and I'm betting far fewer games. What have you changed over the last couple of years, if anything?
I've got higher volume. I've always struggled narrowing. I mean, and look, I'll tell it even to my customers. I mean, if there's one thing, if you ask me to pick one game a week, man, I've never been that great about that. Other guys like yourself have just been so much more talented at picking. I mean, I can tell you sometimes this is what I thought I had the biggest edge in, and this is what I made my biggest bet. But I have found that I've gone more volume. So I actually trust my ratings more now than what I did 5-6 years ago. It's probably because I was young to the process. It's not like I've been in the market 20 years and in year 25, all of a sudden I just start trusting my numbers. It was probably a gradual process where I learned a little bit more. And now I'm at the point where I am who I am at this point. Doesn't mean you got to be tweaking things constantly. Trying to think if there's something specific that I am doing in my power ratings that's different. I seem to add something a little bit different each year that lengthens my process. I always think I have enough time because I'm not doing baseball and whatnot. I can't off the top of my head think of it, but I can tell you this: I'm tweaking little things each year. I took my formula to come up with my power rating each year. Like I have my own up. I mentioned my up downs at each position. And then I'll take an aggregate of a bunch of things that I think are factors: tempo, yards per play from the year before, coaching profiles. I'll even still take aggregates of other people that I trust as far as their ratings, weigh them differently. I'm always tweaking that formula each and every year.
I'm envious because I used to bet the toilet rolls. I'd have 35 games on a Saturday, and you feel a little emasculated when you have to face – hey, I got to change this down. I don't have the same edges that I had before. So,
we're all humans. And I think one of the toughest things for handicappers is that last game on your sheet. Should I bet it or should I not bet it or whatever? And we all say, I had these two games and I dropped them and I didn't bet them and they won, or I added these two and they lost. How to flush that out of the system and just trust your numbers and your tiers and everything else. It's the human part of everything.
And keep in mind, when I'm firing, I mean, again, I'm not part of a syndicate. I'm not looking to bet 10, 20 grand on it. I'm firing. It's usually me against a bookmaker or a couple books opening up when I'm firing. And then, after that, then I'll tell you what I've done differently with my customer release, something that I learned. I was raised in the Mark Lawrence, Phil Steele days, late releases, release Friday, Saturday. Okay. So I didn't have a betting background. So that's what I came up with. That's what I was taught. This is what we do. Latest information is the best information. Over the 5-6 years, 7 years that I've been out on my own, I like early information. I want to get ahead of the number. I trust that I can get closing line value more often than not. I'm not waiting until the end of the week. That is my biggest, I would say, process change that's happened over the course of the last 5-6 years. Earlier bets, earlier release.
Time management.
You mentioned that you're watching all these spring games and such, and you're doing a lot of visual studies. How much does that translate to the regular season? How important is it for you to watch the games versus what you are able to farm out from the box scores?
You guys just, I'll tell you that I love this because almost every question I love that you guys are asking. You can tell you guys have been there, done that. I have been at different points in my betting career. A lot of times, I had so much pressure on me early, because I started my own service. That's the only income I had, type of thing. I felt the need I had to win. If I didn't, I'm out of business. I got to find a different career. So I got to tell you, the first couple of years, I couldn't stomach watching the games, man. I'm too emotional. The bet's in, the pick's in. What can I do about it now other than just worry? So I didn't bet, and I wasn't live betting at that time. So I didn't watch many games live. I'd watch the replay. Hell, I went go through the box score. What the hell happened in the game? The play-by-play. Was there turnovers? Was there key penalties and whatnot? Now I just watch more. I trust the eye test, and I know people are going to roll their eyes at that, but I have watched football my whole life. My dad kind of has more of a scouting background, so I think that gives me an edge where I kind of know a player. And why I watch the spring games is, if certain player gets hurt during the season, I got to go, who's the backup? Okay, I remember watching him in the spring game. He can play, no big deal. So, and obviously, I get that process throughout the watching games during the fall as well. Hopefully, that answered it. If not,
Yeah. No, I like it.
And
You
my
know,
slogan is, don't believe your lying eyes when it comes to NFL. So I try to. I don't watch as much, but I can't blame people for wanting to watch. I mean, sometimes you watch, sometimes you don't.
I'll tell you this: I don't watch much NFL, and there's a lot of years, more often than not, I have more success in the NFL than I do in college. So, but I think some of it is I was too emotional in college. So I've learned to take some emotion out of it. I can tell you this: my walls in my house are more thankful. My remote controls more thankful that I have less emotion.
I understand that completely. A lot of great professional stuff going on here, but most of the people watching have not started their college football prep yet. And most of them aren't going to start their college football prep until a week or two before the season starts. They're doing other things. They're watching baseball. They've got families. They're going on summer vacation and so on. But come time to bet football, they're ready to bet football. Do you have any advice for what would be good time management for the recreational or even a little bit above recreational bettor who hasn't started the process yet and won't and has maybe 2 weeks to go before the season starts?
Uh, Probably less is more. Understand that these games have been out earlier than ever before. It's not like 20, 30 years ago where maybe those numbers have only been out a couple weeks. I mean, week one was posted in May this year. I mean, for every game, didn't matter if it's Alabama or South Alabama. So those numbers are going to be pretty tight. I don't expect to see too much movement. So if you really want to narrow your focus and you really want to win, I mean, I'll tell you what I'll be doing in August, prepping FCS, because those lines won't get posted until game day, and I'll be betting those. But if you're asking me how many bets I'm going to have outside of there being a weather or an injury, I'm not going to be too involved. Now I'm already involved in week 1. I don't anticipate too many more bets. So fully understand that you're betting it into a pretty liquid market, especially after the limits open. I expect them to open a little bit more in August or early August. You'll see some movement then. And then I don't anticipate too much movement. We'll see. And if the guys like myself aren't betting it, the bigger guys aren't betting it, why should you? So I would wait more towards week 2, week 3 to get more heavily involved.
Okay.
You said exactly what I said in the last one is I may not place a bet until week 3, and I have no problem with it. Last year, I had a great year in NCAA, and I don't think I placed my first bet until week 3. And I think it's important for people to not be in a hurry to dive in. One of the issues I had with FCS is finding the full data that I wanted to have on the previous games. So I'd ask you, where are you sourcing that most efficiently? And then my other concern was these lines will move 7 to 10 points if you bet them. And I really don't like, as far as account preservation, I don't want to be betting that stuff into account if it's going to move 7 points. So that's another reason why I kind of left the FCS, alone. What are your thoughts on those two issues?
Yeah, so it depends on the book. I'm not afraid to bet in a Circa. They know who I am. So I mean, I don't think I'm going to get kicked out or limited there.
No.
Certain those books, I'll attack the FCS. A lot of other things, I got to run it through other people. So for account protection, you're right. I don't want to give too many edges away because I really do think there's a good edge in the FCS. It's so simple. I mean, I'll tell you this: FCS, just go through box scores from the week prior. One of the biggest ones, and you're going to say this sounds so simple, but there's no way this could be true, but it is. I'll look to see if 2 quarterbacks played for a certain team the week before, and be like, why did 2 quarterbacks play? Was there a blowout? Was it one snap, a guy came off the field or whatnot, or was there a quarterback injury? And I'm here to tell you that a lot of times is not factored in to the FCS market, quarterback injuries.
That's some solid info.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jot that down.
Mainly, I have my own power ratings. I'll say, I'll plug him because I used to work for him. Phil Steele's got team pages on FCS with all the stats you need. I still go through box scores. I spend, 12 hours a week on it, just going through the games from the week before, what happened and whatnot. It's worth it. I mean, if you're a big time player with a big bankroll, I would say it's not worth it. You can't get enough down. That's not, like you mentioned, Chris, just it's not going to be worth your time to preserve those. You want to preserve those accounts until I start getting kicked out of all of them. Then I'm going to continue to do it. It's worth my time.
I'd like to follow up on that point because box scores, even if you're not doing this for full time, just go through the box scores. Even if you spend 2 minutes on each box score, see if there was a -5 turnover ratio or +5 turnover ratio. See what the scoring was in the second half versus the first half. Did the game get close, but it really wasn't close? You can find those things out without even watching the game, just by reading a box score correctly.
Couldn't have said it better. I mean, that's something I learned. Probably that's the best thing I learned from Phil, even though he's been in it, 30 years, still going through every box score each week. If you put in the time and the effort, I promise you'll find some value out of that.
Well, I know that Ron shared a few tricks of stuff that he's, creating his own stats that you can't readily find, that you've got to extract from each box score to kind of change what they obviously give you. So I'm not going to give away Ron's secret sauce. I do know a couple of things that he does there.
All right.
So
you mentioned Phil Steele, though. No, you go ahead.
What about contests? Do you enjoy them? Do you feel obligated to play them? Do they affect your betting thought process at all?
No, I treat them as a separate entity. I've had some success. I know last year you and I were talking about Willie Hill, and I have regrets on not teaming up that because I got pretty much my ass kicked in that contest. Did not have much success. I know you're one of the, if not the contest player in those. Yeah, they're not the end all for me, but I enjoy them. I do them, and sometimes it's for marketing. You're dealing with stale lives, so I mean, you can, if you're doing really well in a contest, I mean, it's nice to be up there with that. I don't put code names on my contest entries. I just put my name on them. So if you're doing well in a contest, I mean, look, I'm still selling picks. That could be good marketing.
Yeah, that's good. A lot of times you brought up Phil Steele and you got a little background. I think you were associated with Phil Steele. Can you talk about that experience, what you learned from it, how he's evolved over the years? I mean, he started with this newsletter, his publication, and he has 27 or 28 of them now. He's gotten big business. What's your story? What's his story over the years?
So, yeah, I got hired there by a guy by the name of Ralph Michaels, Cal Sports. So a lot of people know him in the industry. He hired me at Phil Steele. So that was about 14 years ago at this point. And I joined Phil because of the college football. I mean, I'm a college football guy at heart, obviously. That's why I follow it year round. I knew about North Coast sports at the time, but I wasn't a big bettor. I wasn't following that. And I kind of gradually learned the process. If you ask me what I learned there, I would say 3 things. I learned how to create a power rating. I learned how to sell in this industry as far as marketing. And I also learned, I would say, not necessarily, betting specific, but I learned how to handicap. Handicapping and betting are a little bit different as far as I'm concerned, but learn how to handicap, power rate, and sell are probably my 3 biggest. How he's evolved, he hasn't a lot. So I think that's a problem. One specific where he has evolved, the magazine's just so much bigger than what it was 20, 30 years ago. One thing that I don't think he takes advantage of enough, he talks to almost every head coach now. And there's a big separation, for obvious reasons, between school and gambling. You don't want to be associated. So he doesn't necessarily ask, in my opinion, when he's on that telephone call for an hour going over the team with the head coach, he's not asking for obvious reasons specific to gambling. Yeah. How you can, what are some edges and actual info out of there. So, yeah, I mean, I would say he hasn't evolved like he should. And
Yeah.
That's why I left, to be honest with you.
I think one of the areas that is such a fine line as you get bigger and bigger in the business, you might have opinions, negative opinions about something, but everything's more positive now. So, every team has a chance in this magazine. So you have to, if you're trying to assert where he stands on it, you're not going to get that because otherwise a coach isn't going to talk to him. So little tough.
Exact. Could not have said it better myself. So how do I do? I'm very respectable. I love Phil. So how do I still get the magazine and I still use it? I mean, it's right here. I mean, that's how readily available it is. It's right at my desk. I'm not necessarily concerned with what his opinion is on the team. Like you mentioned, it's too positive for me. How I use it, I like the depth charts. I'll use the magazine to come up and form my own opinion on the team. So that's usually what I use. I mean, he does have power ratings posted in that magazine, a plus minus power rating. Use those. I mean, there's still a 50-point difference between Alabama and Akron. So, I mean, at least he's taking positions in those that he posts.
Yeah, that's good.
Brad, what do you like the most about handicapping, and what do you dislike the most about handicapping?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. I've never been asked that question before. I like the one thing I love football so much is the process, man. You get that whole week to dive into matchups specific. So handicapping, I've probably gone away from the trend sort of things. I mean, I still use them if they're like outliers and whatnot. That goes back to the program level. So sometimes I do think about it. This is the first time this team's been a road favorite in a decade type of thing. Like UTEP was that, I think a couple years ago. So I've kind of gone away from that part of the handicapping process, looking at trends and whatnot. I'm more matchup specific now, and I kind of like that because I think it probably is more tailor made to my strength because I watch so many games, spring games and whatnot. What I don't like, I got to be honest with you, I don't necessarily like selling picks. So I hope to get to the point where I don't have to do it anymore. And I hope that I'm talented enough to get there to build my bankroll up enough where I'm comfortable enough. I have enough outs. I haven't ruined outs and whatnot. There's a fine line you got to walk in today's day and age. But I would say the handicapping process I don't like is, being a public figure.
Yeah, there's a lot of pitfalls putting yourself in that position. So I understand what you're talking about. NFL.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ron. Go ahead.
Well, in closing out, or one of the closeout questions I have for the college, we're a long way away from the bowl games, but for me, I use a different process to handicap the bowl games. Do you do the same, or how do you approach bowl game handicapping?
Another good question. It's almost like a completely different sport. So I used to be a big guy on motivation, flat spot during the season, this and that. I don't think too much of that now. There's cases where that could be an instant, but it is the number one thing in college bowls, and it shows, especially now. Teams not motivated. What happens? Players opt out. Yeah. So I mean. It's not, anticipating, the team might not show up or whatnot. They just won't show up, period. Players just opt out. You might have a skeleton type of team. Saw that with like Nevada last year and LSU. If you can predict that, teams that you don't think are going to be motivated, I think you could find some of your biggest positive EV advantages that you'll have all season long. I mean, we've seen those specific games move 10 plus points. We're talking end of the season, and they move 10 plus points. So motivation's everything. If you can handicap the motivation, who's going to want to be there and who isn't, that is the number one factor in bowl handicapping. And sometimes the only factor that really matters.
Yeah.
NFL. How seriously are you taking it? What changes have you made over recent years? Where are you finding the value?
Changes, I'm probably less involved. I got, it took me a while, but I just got a couple guys that I really trust, and I still go through box scores each week. I still, feel like I have a good handle of where I think the market's going to, go. So who do I get in front of? But I rely on a couple guys that I really trust. You're one of them. I read your guys' stuff because I know you got more time to do it than I do. I'm busy, not unfortunately, but something I'm looking at James Madison's box score from the week before. I'm not looking at I trust you guys got it down pat. You're following it year round. You guys are long-term winners. And it's just 3-4 guys that I read on a weekly basis, and I trust you guys. And then obviously I take that information and then I formulate my own.
Well, I think that's what I think. If you're really smart about it, that's what you evolve in. And I've been discussing how I've been working with other people in different sports that I just can't originate anymore. And you cry uncle, and you take your skill set of market understanding and market reading and what you do already know, and you combine that with other people really doing the harder lifting. But the combination of the two can be very interesting and successful, I'm finding.
I couldn't agree more with that. I mean, that is how I found my success. I'm not going to be as good of an originator in the NFL as a guy like yourself because I'm too busy with college football. Where I used to have that thought process when I was early on in college. I just have guys I trust. Oh, I trust them. They're doing the work and whatnot. And what I found the hard way is they weren't necessarily doing the work.
Yeah.
So I just do it myself. So I'm still the sole proprietary guy when it comes to college. I trust myself more than any other else. Other sports, specifically the NFL, because it's so liquid, I do. And I'm not a very trustworthy guy, but I trust guys like yourself.
I think you touched on something that's extremely important is you said it about the NCAA exactly the way I feel about my NFL is you have to get your process down to the point where you trust nothing more than your process. And it's not a matter of ego or any of that. It's a matter of the hard work and diligence you're putting in and the numbers you're coming up with. And you just know, because when you have these systems, you know when things are going awry. You get these little sixth senses, so to speak. And you've got to, I recommend to people, your process, you will know it when your process is good enough for you to step it up, so to speak. Because a lot of people ask, well, when am I going to know when I can be good enough and step up in class? You're going to know it. You will know it some way, somehow. And if you don't know it, then you're not ready.
Yeah, if you got to think about it in this industry, then you're probably not ready. It should just come natural. Like you should just have the confidence. Yep, let's go. And it's not you step. Oh, I got an ego now and whatnot. I've never had that. I've always respected the market and whatnot. But over the years, it's just I don't have to think about it. Think twice about it. I just just fire. I trust the process. Just fire. College football is like that. The other sports, obviously, not so much.
Right.
Yeah. Getting into a routine, it sounds boring, but the thing that I like the best about my process is very methodical. I know what I'm going to do on Sunday. I know what I'm going to do on Monday. I know how to attack this. I know what I'm doing in July and August. I'm preparing the point where I'm getting ready to write my previews, I have a first draft power rating, a second draft power rating, and so on and so forth. It's not boring because as you discover something and as you hit on something, you say, wow, this isn't I'm connecting the dots. I'm going through the schedule. One of the things I was going to ask you about is, do you do a deep dive in the NCAA schedule or even the NFL schedule? Chris and I have done a very deep dive into the NFL schedules, for example, finding it's not who you play. We've all known who, but when you play them, short week, division off, non-division, revenge game, whatever the factor may be. It's part of the process, and it's actually part of the process that I like the most. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so once you do get it down, and a lot of what we're discussing is, comes with experience, having that, like Chris mentioned, that sixth sense sort of thing. How do you get that experience, being in it? So I do have a process. I can tell you what I'm doing, what I'm going to do project-wise, March, April, May, and where I need to be as far as my prep work. It's so regimented. It slight tweaks each year, but it gets to the point I could tell you the hour of the day during the week, during football season, I can tell you what I'm doing, basically. So it very regimented. I don't mind it. You have to have it, I think, in order to be successful. You just can't go off the beaten path from time to time. I've not found success in that regard with that. Schedule-wise, you know what? I used to get into it a little bit. I'd look at bye weeks and whatnot. But I found it just hasn't mattered too much. Like, I'll use an example. Notre Dame, the ACC really went up against them a couple of years in a row where every ACC team that they faced was coming off a bye. So
I
mean,
remember
sometimes,
that.
and it just didn't matter. It didn't matter. You know what matters? It's so different than the NFL, where every little edge matters in the NFL. Every half point, every little thing, like you guys mentioned, matters. College, you got a good power rating. You plug that into a schedule. There's going to be overrated teams, underrated teams. You're good to go. I hate to make it. I hope that doesn't sound too simplistic, but if you got a good power rating, you don't need to worry about any of those other factors.
No, that's excellent, because sometimes we overrate schedule.
I'd like to see us actually maybe even spend an entire video on habits as far as being structured and getting into a routine with betting. I think it's absolutely imperative. It's just so important to have your habits down pat and to have some sort of regularity that works for you. And it's also equally important to point out what doesn't work for you, what is impeding your success, what is disrupting your mood and your willingness to be able to do what you need to do in your process throughout the course of the week. Habits are extremely important for me. And if I get out of my routine, it's going to cause me some problems.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I'll use past experience. I mean, you think, the more you work, the better you're going to be. I was at a point a few years ago where I was putting in 100-hour weeks. Didn't work. But I was at a point where that extra 10, 15 hours or whatnot was a net negative for me. The sleep, that extra hour of sleep I was not getting was a difference. Or I was on a podcast or some radio show or whatnot. It was a big time net negative. So knowing your limits is also very important. And you know, again, it comes with experience in the industry. And a lot of times you got to learn some hard lessons, unfortunately.
Yeah,
I agree.
I think the only break I take is that the sample sizes are low in any particular week. Anybody, we're not going to hit 75% all year. We're lucky if we do that one week. So in any particular week, if the week is 2 and 6 or something like that, I might take an extra day before I start my process and just, not be impulsive about it. You got to know yourself. You got to know that you're not chasing. You got to know that just because there's a game on Sunday night or Monday night, you don't have to play it. You have to stay within your own system. That's the only pause that I would make in my routine.
And I would say this as a guy, and it's a positive and a negative. I'm a workaholic. It's okay to take, even during football season, an afternoon, couple hours, maybe go see a movie, take the wife or the significant other out to dinner. I think to have something like that once a week, even if it's a couple hours to get away from the screen, can be really good for your mental health.
You and I can do that. We have to teach Chris how to do that.
I actually do not know the results of the NFL Sunday card until Monday sometimes, because things might start off so poorly. I just don't want to make myself suffer. So I'll go out and I'll work or I'll do something else. And so that I don't want to be mentally defeated on that Sunday. I want to postpone it till I'm ready if I'm going to have a bad day, if that makes any sense. So
it makes perfect sense. I'm there all the time. Go do something else. Sunday nights, a lot of times I have found that's one of the best nights to do it. Whether you had a big weekend or a losing weekend, just to decompress a little bit on a Sunday night's usually a good time to do it, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah,
I have one more question. Do you like beer?
I used to. I don't drink too much anymore because I probably drink a little too much as far as I'm concerned. It's probably a weakness, but yeah, certainly. I'm German Irish, so it's in my blood. I would say, though, I prefer probably the dark liquor, whiskey is my preference.
No, I'm just asking that because I've had such a good time during this last hour that I think at some point when I next get to Vegas, COVID has prevented that. That'd be great to share a beer with you.
Absolutely. I'm going to tell you guys, and obviously I've known you in the past, Chris, This is literally, and I'm not saying this because I'm on it right now, one of the best conversations I've had in a medium format, obviously in the last 5-6 years.
We greatly appreciate it because this is just a love project for Ron and I, and there's Ted that's involved with us, and we just want to discuss and absorb and process, try to learn from each other and try to bring the light, because I'm sure you get pounded in DMs and I get pounded in DMs. What about this? What about that? What about this? What about, and we're just trying to answer some of those questions, and it's basically the shoot the shit hour, and it's not about picks. We're not going to do anybody any good giving them picks. We want to give them process. We want to give them some sort of roadmap where they can do this stuff on their own. So that's what we're trying to do. We appreciate that you've enjoyed it.
Love it. Process over picks, guys.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
I would really like the way you were tweeting out that you're following. You would name off the stadiums. I noticed you're at 37,000, and you would keep on naming stadiums that you could fill with your followers. So, what stadium are you up to at 37,000?
I don't know yet, because I think I've just crossed 30. If I haven't already, I think it's going to happen the next day or two. And I was just getting ready to send that tweet out. I'm not sure. I think it's still a group of 5, but I think I'm up to 44. I think out of the 131.
Oh,
you got Corvallis in there yet?
States I can fill. So people appreciate it. Another thing that I'm going to do, because my prep work's going to be done here for at least the most part. I'm going to take a couple weeks, and I love traveling across the country. I'm going to visit about 25 different stadiums.
That's awesome. I mean, I cannot recommend to people, if you ever have a chance to take a cross-country trip, just go. Just go and drive. It's just so awesome, and just wing it along the way. I mean, you'll have a lot of fun.
I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you very much. Shameless plugs. Do you have any shameless plugs?
Yeah, follow me. You mentioned Twitter. Just follow me on Twitter at BradPower7.
Sounds good. For Ron and Brad, we thank you guys for joining us, and feel free to hit the comments for any follow-up questions, and we'll do our best to answer you. And until we see you guys again,